You are listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Mile High Huddle's Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman.
Freeman is back there, blocked by Leary, caught for the touchdown! A 2-yard laser! Fumangali from the University of Wisconsin. Third and goal at the 1. Lindsey is in. Janovich, the fullback. Janovich hit. Nice big hit there by Kendrick. He continues to dig. They call a touchdown. They call a touchdown on a 1-yard jump inside.
Trying to set up the screen to his tight end, Noah Fant. He's got some room to run. He cuts it back at the 10. Fant takes it in. Touchdown, Denver. The first NFL touchdown for the rookie tight end out of Iowa. End zone caught. Touchdown, Courtland Sutton. His 5th career touchdown, but his first here in Denver.
And now, here are Broncos country's football priests to help you exorcise the demons of another doomed season.
I have exorcised the demons. This house is clear.
And we're live. Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented, as always, by Mile High Huddle, powered by Overtime Media. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me, as always, my partner in crime. You know him, you love him. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, it was Larry yesterday who asked us, hey, aren't Mike and Kyle Shanahan the first father-son duo to lead a team to the Super Bowl as head coaches? And we were like, sounds right, but off the top of our heads, we're not sure. Literally no sooner did we get off the pod that we're realizing through the breaking news and all the infographics and memes, hitting Twitter and all social media. Yes, in fact, by virtue of that victory, Kyle Shanahan gave the Broncos a little bit of history, put them in the history books with Mike there, because, of course, Broncos won 2 Super Bowls with Mike Shanahan, and now his son Kyle taking the San Francisco 49ers to the Super Bowl to take on the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, it's a great story, Chad, but it's more salt in the wound for the Broncos, I believe. They wanted Mike Shanahan back. That didn't work out. They passed on hiring Kyle Shanahan. That didn't work out. They hired Vance Joseph. So it was just to show that the Shanahans have a pretty good coaching lineage. And if there's another one that pops out, the Broncos should write a blank check.
Man, it's still so hard, for Broncos fans, the implications, that could have been us going to the Super Bowl this year. Well, first of all, you still would have had to have gotten through the Chiefs to have a chance. A. B. Kyle Shanahan wanted full control of the roster as basically GM / head coach, like his father was at his peak, at his peak with the Broncos and in Washington. And John Elway and the Broncos, they had their reasons for passing on him and going with Vance Joseph. Elway, we've talked about his preconceived notions, all that in the past, but really it boiled down to with Kyle, they didn't feel like he was ready to be making, not just focusing on coaching the team and scheme and managing all that stuff, but also personnel. They didn't think he was ready. And there's probably something to be said also, Zack, for John Elway not wanting to give up that control himself.
Yeah, that's probably what it came down to, Chad. Like we talked about it on yesterday's pod. At that time, when the Broncos were looking for Gary Kubiak's replacement, Elway had all the power and he wasn't afraid of flexing it. And he wanted to show that he was the guy in charge, and he wanted a coach who he could control the team through. And that's why ultimately he hired Vance Joseph. That wouldn't have flown with Kyle Shanahan. There's many theories as to why it didn't work out, why Shanahan, he actually said later that year, he never even felt like during the interview he was going to get the job. So obviously they didn't communicated to him that he was a real legit candidate. They had their eye on Vance Joseph all along, and they made just the wrong call. That's all what it boiled down to, just the wrong call.
Hindsight, there's a reason why they say hindsight's 20/20. At the time, again, John Elway is 1 year removed from leading the Denver Broncos to a world championship and a second Super Bowl berth in 3 years. And so, and also the year in which the Broncos were having to rehire a new head coach, they were coming off a 9-7 finish with basically a rookie quarterback. Simeon wasn't a rookie, but he was a first-year starter. He had, I think, 1 kneel down, 1 snap as a rookie in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. So he was still filling his oats and he was still riding high. He had yet to, crash back down to earth and have to rethink his whole approach post Peyton Manning. That was to come, and Vance Joseph kind of helped him do that. You're always going to wonder what could have been with Kyle Shanahan, but the football fates, they willed it otherwise. And I think for Broncos fans, this is me being armchair psychologist here. get off the, don't waste your mental energies on, let's call it football envy and Kyle Shanahan. Be excited about the fact that if internally and externally, the Broncos found the right head coach, and they finally found a franchise caliber quarterback. And by virtue of those two things, this team is headed in the right direction, Zach.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely a glass half full approach. The Broncos missed out on Kyle. They had to go through 2 years of Vance Joseph, but those 2 years were worth it because it led them to Vic Fangio, who looks like the coach of the future. Like you mentioned, the quarterback of the future. The arrow is pointing upward in Denver right now. Maybe not as high as in San Francisco, but the Broncos are on the right track, so it is appealing in its own right.
Guys, we're going to go through a article that was published on Monday by Bob Morris at milehighhuddle.com, kind of breaking down how the Broncos are going to prioritize their picks at 15 in the first round. We're going to get to that. Very good read. If you haven't, once you get off this pod, make sure you go check that out in depth. We're going to quote from it a little bit here in our conversation, and then we'll get to your guys' questions. But first, just a couple of quick matters of business. As always, guys, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. Simply the best way for you to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the show in real time. And then don't forget to head on over to Apple Podcasts when you get a second. Leave a creative review on the show if you like what Zach and I are doing. Give us a 5-star rating. It's a great organic way to support the show, and it also enters you into our monthly giveaway for some swag.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Simply Safe Home Security is like getting commercial-grade, enterprise-level security, but for your own home. Think about the security Fortune 500 companies use. They need to know police are going to be on the scene immediately. This is exactly the kind of security you get with Simply Safe. If there's a break-in, Simply Safe uses real video evidence to give police an eyewitness account of the crime, and that means police dispatch up to 350% faster than for a normal burglar alarm. With Simply Safe, you get comprehensive protection for your home. Outdoor cameras and doorbells alert you to anyone approaching your home. Entry, motion, and glass break sensors guard the inside of your home. Plus, Simply Safe protects your home from fires, water damage, and carbon monoxide poisoning. It's all monitored 24/7 by live security professionals. You can set up your system yourself with no tools needed, or Simply Safe's experts can do it for you. And it's only 50 cents a day with no contracts. Go to simplysafe.com/overtime today to get free shipping on your order, plus a 60-day money-back guarantee. That's simplysafe.com/overtime to save on home security today. SIMPLI, safe.com/overtime. All right, Zach, here's the title of this article that I want to go through. Just a couple of the points Bob makes here. And by the way, Bob is kind of, I saw a couple questions here in the comment stream, like who's Bob Morris? People, some people are just used to seeing or hearing from you and I, maybe Eric Trickle. Bob Morris he's kind of our resident capologist at milehighhuddle.com. He is very knowledgeable and experienced when it comes to, the NFL CBA, salary caps, the way they work, contracts, guaranteed money, signing bonuses, like all that stuff. He's the guy that I lean on, Zach leans on. He's our resident cap guy. And sometimes, of course, he dabbles in the draft and stuff like that. But that's his primary thing for us, especially, man. He's really, really savvy at that. But this particular article that Bob wrote, and he's been with me at Mile High Huddle with us now a couple of years, but it's titled, "The Positions the Broncos Are Likely to Prioritize at Pick 15 in the Draft." And basically, here's what it comes down to. We talk about, Zach, the fact that, the BPA approach versus need. There's this misconception that best player available is an absolute, that you only draft the best player available on your board. But what people miss is that BPA, for most teams, there are some exceptions, but almost, I'd say probably a 75 percentile of NFL teams, when it comes down to their big board in the draft, they take the best player available at a position of need. So off the top of your head at pick 15, here's a couple that Bob's got here, positions that aren't a need, so they're not going to use a first-round pick. Running back, would you concur that taking a running back at pick 15 is probably not in the cards?
I would agree with that.
You got running back. Let me see what else you got here. Quarterback, of course. You're not going to – no. And it's probably going to be at least a conversation until the draft comes and goes, just for the sake of, off-season tropes, storylines to keep the conversation going. But there are no signs, Zach, that the Broncos are going to even consider taking a quarterback in round 1 or 2. If they do take a quarterback this year, it's going to be a late round quarterback to kind of bolster depth behind Locke.
I mean, this is one of the perks, Chad, of finally finding your franchise guy. You don't have to keep swinging and missing on first or second round quarterbacks. They traded up for Locke last year. They found their guy. He went 4-1. He is the QB of the future. So quarterback and running back, those are two safe positions, I think, to rule out in round 1.
Also, edge rusher. And,
right.
It's not, this one's, I think you could argue is a little bit more of a maybe because Von Miller's getting a little bit long in the tooth. But you've got Bradley Chubb and Von Miller. You got two of the best edge rushers in the league on one team. Unless you literally have like a top 5 blue chip player in the class, like a Chase Young dropping to 15, you're not using that pick on an edge rusher, Zach.
I mean, the only way I can see it, Chad, is if they lose Derek Wolfe, they lose Shelby Harris, looking for like a tweener edge rusher, defensive end / outside linebacker. But even then, you have Chubb coming back. You have Malik Reed, who came on last year. And of course, you have Von Miller, who I think will have a bounce back in 2020. So edge rusher, like you said, more of a maybe, but still very unlikely.
The last one here is basically wide receiver, not the speed one. Like if it's a speed guy or a guy that's good with the ball in the open field that brings a combination of speed and elusiveness, a guy that you can involve in the screen game who's a threat to take it to the house every time, like a Laviska Shenault, a Henry Ruggs. I'm not talking about that type of receiver, but like another big-bodied Cortland Sutton, another 6'4", 215-pound possession receiver, go up and get the ball receiver. That's not a guy that you're really looking at spending a number 15 overall first-round pick on because you already have one of the, let's say, top 10 at that position already on your roster. You need something, maybe a receiver, yeah, but you need one that will complement that skill set.
Right. I mean, you have enough possession guys. With respect to Cortland Sutton, you also have Deshaun Hamilton, you have Tim Patrick, you have Juwan Winfrey. The Broncos are loaded with those types of receivers. The one receiver they don't have and they should target is a speedster like you mentioned, Chad. So possession guy, definitely a hard pass in the first couple of rounds, or if at all in the draft.
Guys, there's a bunch of questions coming in. We're going to get to them, I promise. We see the super chats as well, guys. We'll get to you just one second. For me, it's still, even the speed. I mean, I'm not going to shed a tear if the pick ended up being a Laviska Shenault or it ends up being a Henry Ruggs. But I still, the closer we're getting to this draft, the less interested I am in the Broncos taking a wide receiver at pick 15, simply because it's a very deep class. I mean, if you talk to our senior draft analyst, Eric Trickle, it's one of, if not the best wide receiver classes of all time. And you think back to 2014, that was a great wide receiver class. He's saying this one rivals that, not just in terms of the talent at the top and it being a top-heavy class, but Zach, if you can find a Cortland Sutton caliber impact player, I'm not saying a carbon copy possession receiver, but that kind of a talent in the second or third round to complement Cortland Sutton, that would be a huge win, allowing you to then in the first round, you're taking a Javon Kinlaw, a offensive tackle, interior O-line, whatever else it might be, a cornerback.
Yeah, I'm not going to cry, Chad, if Okudah falls to the Broncos or Simmons falls to the Broncos. I'm not going to cry about that, but a wide receiver is so high up on the Broncos board, I believe, and the addition of Pat Shurmur, who loved hoarding wide receivers with the Giants. He had 3 or 4 on the field at the same time. I think that leads me to believe that if not the first round, definitely by the second round, if they don't have a wide receiver 2 in tow, they're going to target that guy.
All right, guys, let me grab a couple questions here. Buona Beast starts off, and then we'll grab these super chats. Could you grade our draft selections? A grade for their play in their rookie year and a grade for potential moving forward. Incomplete grades are acceptable. Let me put a pin in that one, Buona Beast. Once Zach starts talking here, I'm going to grab one more question while he's talking. I'll grab it, the list of last year's class, just so I'm not going off the top of my head. I probably could. Well, let's just do it. I can do it off the top of my head. First round pick, Zach, Noah Fant. Your grade for Buona Beast.
Oh, man, I got to give the guy, I would say a B-. He was I would say a C- to start the season off. He was coming off a little slow. He really developed, though, as the season wore on, blocking and pass catching. So he wasn't perfect. He has a lot to improve on, but I saw the flashes of that Gronkowski-type tight end. So I'm going with B- for Noah Fant.
Speaking of Gronkowski, tied to Gronkowski tight ends, did you watch the Aaron Hernandez special?
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to derail our conversation.
It's gripping.
Dude, that had me, it was a complete binge from the very beginning. And there's been some mixed reviews in terms of, some people trying to pick nits that it's not the greatest documentary, that it didn't know kind of what it wanted to be. But ultimately, the story of Aaron Hernandez is
sad,
freaking sad, but it's also very compelling. You're like, what in the heck happened to this dude? Anyway, Noah Fant, for me, it's a B. It's a B. Yeah. It's a solid B. He had some issues. They asked him too much to be a one-on-one blocker as a rookie, and some of that had to do with Jeff Hireman not being reliable in the health department. But with the exception of that, was it the first Chiefs game? I think it was, that he had that bad case of the drops. Outside of that, dude, especially down the stretch, he was a big reason why this team kind of turned the corner, even though they'd already, basically dug themselves a hole and out of the playoff conversation. He was a big reason they were able to do that. Second round, you got 2 picks. Dalton Risner at 41, Drew Lock at 42. Your grades.
Dalton Risner, to me, gets an A, Chad. He was almost perfect throughout the entire season. He was a plug-and-play starter, and I believe a perennial Pro Bowler as soon as next year. So A for Dalton Risner. And Drew Lock, I'm debating either A- or B+. He was right. I mean, obviously the record shows it's probably an A grade. He went 4-1. He upset the Texans. He upset the Chargers. He ended the season on a positive note. He's the franchise guy. Made some mistakes, so he's not perfect. So I'm going to go a little pessimistic and say B+, but he can easily be an A- in my book.
Dude, I'm going A on both of them because and I'm not trying to be orange-colored glasses, guys. I mean, honestly, I think Dalton Risner, he fought through an ankle injury that kind of sapped him a little bit toward the end of the season. He wasn't quite the same player as he was early on. You could maybe even argue that might have something to do a little bit with the rookie wall, et cetera. But overall, I mean, as a rookie, second-round pick, to step in and be the best offensive lineman, I mean, on the starting 5, that's an achievement, and it speaks to the quality of that draft pick for the team. I give that one an A. As for Drew Lock, I mean, I don't know what that kid could have done any different himself besides not get hurt to make a better impact as a rookie. And we've talked about this before, but my biggest what if is what would have happened? What could have been if the Broncos, when he suffers that thumb injury in the 3rd preseason game, instead of putting him on IR because you value having that 53rd spot on the roster that you never use and you don't even dress, instead of putting him on IR, what would have happened if you'd have just kept him on the active roster? Because, the Broncos get out to an 0-4 start. They probably still stick with Joe Flacco, but about the week 5 time period is when Drew Lock actually is good to go. He gets cleared. By week 7, when he's actually eligible to begin practicing as an IR guy, he's saying publicly to the media, yeah, I've been good to go for a couple weeks. So you're thinking week 5. Broncos probably still stick with Joe Flacco through week 5. Week 6, they got 2 wins, so they're sticking with him. But that Chiefs loss, dude, coming out of that Chiefs loss, I think the Broncos would have pulled the trigger on the Drew Lock era, and it might have been able to save the season. Maybe not. Maybe it still unfolds basically the same way from a win-loss perspective. But, Zach, two more wins even on last year's record, you could be talking about a team playing in the wild card round.
It's true, and the most messed up part to me, Chaz, not only did the Broncos put Lock on IR, they did it to keep Bryce Callahan on the 53, and we all know how that disaster turned out. So I say Elway gets an F for those 2 moves, but I think you convinced me. I'm going to give Drew Lock an A-. He really was pretty good last year. I think his play speaks for himself. Considering the lack of coordination on offense, they fired his coach, and the lack of weapons and lack of offensive line continuity. So A- for me for Drew Lock.
Draymond Jones in the 3rd round.
I want to say
Strong was a conference player of the week. Was it week 16 against the Lions? He got that nod, so that's impressive.
I'm going to go C. I think he was a pretty average guy. He didn't blow me away, but he didn't have any fatal flaws in his first year. He was mostly incomplete, Chad, because he was barely on the field. He was a substitute player for the most part, a limited player. So he wasn't bad, but he wasn't necessarily great. So I'm going to go C for Draymond Jones.
It traditionally takes defensive linemen a couple of years to kind of settle in, acclimate, and turn the corner. I think, if anything, Draymond Jones showed that he's a guy that's going to be able to kind of shorten that learning curve a little bit. The impact he made down the stretch when the Broncos had lost Derek Wolfe, they'd lost Adam Gotsis, they didn't really have much choice but to play him. He stepped up. I'll give him a B- for a rookie. Now, 5th round, you jump to Justin Hollins, who, in my opinion, Zach, was, even though the Broncos tried to play him at off ball, they tried to play him at edge, he never really was able to kind of orient himself. They feel like he was capable as far as having the football acumen to do both and juggle both, but I think it was a disservice to him.
Yes.
Ultimately, I got to give him like a C-, dude. I wasn't very impressed with him as a rookie.
Yeah, I agree with you. I put it more on the Broncos coaching staff. It was almost like playing DeMarcus Walker at a linebacker in his first year. I don't know why the Broncos insist on cramming these players multiple positions and responsibilities. I mean, he's obviously an edge rusher. He didn't cut it at inside linebacker. I'm going to go C- though. I saw some flashes in his game. He had some explosion off the edge. I think another year in the system, he'll be a contributor in the Malik Reed, Shaq Barrett type role.
And then lastly, unless I missed my mark, I'm pretty sure the last guy in the class is Juwan Winfrey. The Broncos traded up to grab him.
Incomplete. It's got to be.
Incomplete. He didn't play, dude. I mean, I liked what I saw from him in the preseason, but he just couldn't crack the lineup. And that's even considering that it got kind of ugly at wide receiver for the Broncos post Emmanuel Sanders trade. And before Tim Patrick came back, he still couldn't beat out Fred Brown. He still couldn't get on the field over Deontay Spencer, who, by the way, unless I'm completely misreading this thing, which I don't think I am, one of the silver linings to the Kansas City Chiefs making it to the Super Bowl is Deontay Spencer is the first alternate as kick returner for the AFC. He should be replacing Mecole Hardman. That should be announced here very soon, I would assume.
Yeah, and he deserves it. The Broncos, relatively speaking, he was the best Broncos punt returner, Chad, in many years, considering Isaiah McKenzie disaster. They had Trenton Holiday, the best one since him. So yeah, he deserves it. I'm happy for him if he goes to the. And
dude, overall, I would give 1 year removed from the draft class. I would give John Elway and that scouting department. I'd give him a solid B+.
Yep.
Maybe even better. And history might judge this class even way better than that. Because if you indeed got a franchise cornerstone offensive lineman, franchise tight end, and a franchise quarterback in your first 3 picks,
right?
I mean, that's hitting it out of the park, Zach.
I think anything past those first 3 picks, Chad, was gravy. I'm going to give the Elway for that class an A-. I mean, you get your franchise quarterback, that's an A in itself. Then you have Dalton Risner, our day 1 starter, Noah Fant, a potential, like you said, tight end of the future. I think A- for Elway. 2 really great draft classes back to back, and it's setting the foundation for the Broncos going forward.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Buona Beast question taking over the show. We just spent like 10 minutes on your question because we love you, bro. Michael says, Mile High Huddle, who is Bob? He knows nothing. I only read pages that has your face on it. Or Zach, if he does one, we need to beef up the O-line. You gotta temper that. We appreciate the enthusiasm. We appreciate the love. We love you back, Michael. But anyone that writes for milehighhuddle.com, you gotta treat them like Chad and Zach. They're all high quality analysts covering your Denver Broncos. Let me grab here super chat from Steven, one of our superstars. Appreciate you, bro.
Thank you, Steven.
$5 donation. He says, if the Chiefs cut Sammy Watkins, should the Broncos sign him? I think Denver will be a team that is now favorable for players with Drew and Fangio. Favorable as a destination, he's trying to say, where guys want to come here now. Your answer for Steven.
I agree with the second point. I don't agree with going after Sammy Watkins. He's going to cost too much money, and he's way too injury prone for my liking, Chad. I think the Broncos would do themselves a better service by drafting a receiver. He's cheaper, he's younger, better upside, and he just fit in the offense. So I like Sammy Watkins, but way too many injuries for me to splurge on.
In a perfect world, I agree with you as far as it comes down to money. What's he going to want? If he's trying to break the bank, I don't need that. If I'm the Denver Broncos, if he's reasonable about what he's asking for, I think he would bring the type of what he can do with his speed and what he can do with the ball in his hands type of dynamic that could offer you that compliment for Cortland Sutton and maybe allow you to prioritize your draft a little bit differently. But I don't love the idea. It would all come down to money. And Mr. Boggins jumps in, by the way, $5 donation.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. We'll look for any of your comments or questions in the stream here. This was an interesting little storyline that popped up last night, Zach. You quote tweeted it. The Empower retirement congratulated the Kansas City Chiefs. This we're talking about the stadium sponsor at Mile High, right? They congratulated the Kansas City Chiefs via tweet and then hashtagged them proud partner. Really throwing off, very distasteful for a lot of Broncos fans. I don't think it's anything to really get your panties in a wad over. However, I can understand at the same time why that rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way.
Sports Authority would never do this, Chad. I'm just saying, I'm just putting it out there. They would never happen with them, sponsoring the Broncos Stadium. But yeah, it's no huge deal. It's a little jarring to a Broncos fan to see them celebrating. But if they're a partner with them, I mean, they're a company. They have their obligation to talk up their sponsorship. So not too surprising.
Purple Pony 95 watching on Twitter on Periscope wants to know, is there a player the Broncos should consider moving up to pick in the first round? Zach, if you could get within striking distance of Isaiah Simmons, or Jeffrey Okudah, I'm seeing what I can do, but I'm not giving up the farm. I can't bet the bank on that. It would have to make sense, but those are 2 guys that, defensive guys especially, that I covet.
I mean, if the Broncos fall in love with a Jerry Jeudy or Henry Ruggs type receiver and they don't think they're going to get last to 15, I can see the Broncos moving up. But yeah, defensive players, Okudah, Simmons, they have the capital this year, Chad. That's why I'm saying they might not stay at 15. They're not going to go down, I believe, but they might come up. Not likely, but definitely possible.
Angela jumps in with a $21 donation up in Canada. Broncos country is not a geographical location. It is a state of being, and Angela proves that. Hey, it would have been different. Happy for Lynch, John Lynch, and Kyle Shanahan. Couldn't be happier where we ended up. Accident likely. Fangio, Elway, and Locke. Let's start the new momentum. Surround him. Yeah, I mean, that's the mindset I think that's the appropriate, especially if you want to maintain your sanity, dude. That's the appropriate mindset. And I don't think you're bending reality to have that mindset. Like, the Broncos are heading in the right direction. And 4-1, it's not like they dominated every opponent like they did the Houston Texans down the stretch, but finding ways to win, even when it means winning ugly, like against Detroit, getting down 10 and then coming back and controlling that game in the second half, fighting, scrapping against the Raiders. You like that this team found different ways to win once they inserted the right guy at quarterback.
Listen, respect the 49ers, root for the 49ers, but also be happy in thine own self. Be happy with the Broncos and what they're doing under Vic Fangio. They're trending in the right direction. They found their coach of the future. They have their quarterback of the future. They ended last year on an upswing. This is not the Vance Joseph Dark Ages era. This is a new time in Broncos country. It can be independent things. It doesn't have to be tied to Kyle Shanahan. Be happy with the way the Broncos are trending as well.
Our good friend Paul jumps in. Been a while since we've seen you, Paul. It's good to have you, bro. With a $20 donation on Super Chat. Appreciate you so much. He says, I want speed at wide receiver still, but with the switch at offensive coordinator, I think more of the same we have gotten for years. Wait, let me get that right. The syntax here. With the switch at offensive coordinator, I think more of the same we've gotten for years. Zach, can you interpret?
They might not get a speedy wide receiver. They might just go with possession guys. That's the only thing I can think of from that statement.
Right.
Clarify, Paul. Tell us what you mean by that.
I'll find you again in the stream, Paul. Try and clarify on that. We thank you so much, dude, for the support and the donation.
Thank you.
Our friend Trick Lessons Podcast says, I think we desperately need a left tackle or an offensive guard. We're with you on that. It's just a matter of who's going to be there at pick 15. You don't want to reach. Xavier jumps in. $5 donation.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, Xavier. What positions would you guys want the Broncos to focus on during free agency? My hope is that we fortify the D-line and sign a solid DB. I think those are your two most pressing issues right there. Xavier, you hit the nail on the head. For me, the number one hole on this roster is cornerback, especially with Chris Harris Jr.'s future being up in the air. You need to really dedicate team resources, and I'm talking cap dollars. In a perfect world, you want to fill your biggest needs with cap dollars, not so you're not so dependent on need in the draft. You can be a lot more disciplined to your BPA at those positions that you want to bolster long term. So I'm thinking cornerback. I'm thinking, they have to do something about the defensive line, whether that's going to include making decisions on Derek Wolfe, Shelby Harris. I think Adam Gotsis is as good as gone. And you're going to see a restricted free agent tender get leveled for Mike Purcell's at.
I think the Broncos are going to lose 2 out of their big 3 defensive line free agents this offseason, Chad. So defensive line for sure is a priority. Chris Jones, Akeem Hicks, there's many linemen out there that can come on a flyer, short-term, low-money deal to help out the defense. Like you mentioned, cornerback, also maybe inside linebacker for some depth. They could go after a tight end, but I think they're going to save a majority of their offensive selections for the draft. Wide receiver, tackle, guard, they're going to use the holes in free agency and the money they have to plug it up with defensive players predominantly.
Philip says, I saw a mock draft with us taking a corner, which is a nice fit right now, but what does anybody think about the move if we already get a top cornerback in free agency? I'm torn. I feel like it comes down to Callahan. Look, let's say the Broncos, Zach, re-sign Chris Harris Jr. They bring him back on a 2 or 3 year deal, and all is right with the world between Chris and the Broncos. That, to me, would not remove cornerback and the long-term viability of the position off the board. If the right corner is there, if Christian Fulton or Jeff Gladney, Okudu's not going to be there. But if either of those guys are there, you still have to strongly consider grabbing one of them.
I mean, even if Chris Harris Jr. comes back, who is behind him, Chad, they can develop for the future? What's one competent young Broncos cornerback? Devontae Bosby, that's it. I'm not counting on Isaac Yiadom. I'm not counting on Duke Dawson. They still need a cornerback, so absolutely, it's going to be a need regardless of Chris Harris Jr. status. Steven
jumps in, $2 donation. Appreciate you, bro. Should the Broncos pick up Hicks? I assume you're talking about Akeem Hicks. Unless he's been released, I don't think he has. I know Eric's talked about this. He's a guy that Akeem Hicks that could end up being a street free agent. They could cut him, release him unexpectedly. Well, maybe not so unexpectedly, but he could be one of these cap casualties. Not the greatest fit in Chuck Pagano's defense, but a marvelous fit with Vic Fangio. Zach, if the Broncos cut Akeem Hicks, Vic Fangio will be all over that like white on rice.
As well he should, especially if he loses some depth in the middle. My first guy that I want in free agency is obviously Chris Jones, like every other Broncos fan, but that's not really realistic. So Akeem Hicks would be a great veteran flyer, be a good bridge guy for the young guys. He would provide great depth in the system. Fangio knows him, so I would not cry about that if the Broncos picked him up.
Aaron jumps in a $20 donation on Super Chat and a phenomenal profile pic with the catch. Nice looking fish you got there, my brother. He says, I saw Tom Brady at the McGregor fight in Vegas. Made me happy that he didn't have better things to do this time of year. Yeah. Also, given the last few draft classes, I'm back in Elway we trust mindset. Excited for pick 15. Yeah, I think Elway, he had to, he kind of got used to doing things a certain way. We've talked about this quite a bit on the show, but new listeners come in each and every episode. He got used to doing things a certain way and kind of prioritizing potential and raw athleticism over proven, dedicated, football-minded, mature athletes. He could get away with taking risks on those kind of high upside, big risk type of players, but with big upside, because you had Peyton Manning, Zach, that would cover holes if you were wrong. And post Super Bowl 50, it took him a couple of drafts to realize he had to really rethink his entire scouting process, how they prioritize players, what type of football players were going to fit the quote-unquote Bronco way. And you saw him finally hit his stride. 2018 knocked it out of the park, that draft class, and the college free agent in Phillip Lindsay. Also 2019. So I'm with you on that, Aaron. And I think that he made the right decision based on the candidates that were available to him last year in the head coaching carousel. I think he made the right decision on Fangio. All signs pointed to Mike Munchak being the guy. I was ready. I had articles written. We're ready to go, dude. Mike Munchak's the guy. And he waited for resolution for the Chicago Bears, who were still in the playoffs. Bears lost to, I think it was the Philadelphia Eagles. The next day, they flew out to Chicago, had their interview with Vic Fangio, and Vic Fangio just made all that consideration on Munchak and anyone else they were strongly looking at, including Chuck Pagano, go away. And what that tells me, Zach, is he was sincere, at least, when he said, look, when I hired Vance Joseph, I went into it with preconceived notions. It backfired. I got to rethink it. I got to do it a different way. And I think that proved that he has changed and he has recognized the areas of his wheelhouse that needed changed. He faced them, he tackled them, and it's starting to pay dividends for the team.
I remember I literally had a Mike Munchak article written for him getting the Broncos job that I couldn't even use. So we both thought he'd be the favorite, and Vic Fangio came in, and he was the right choice. But after Peyton Manning left, it was like what's going to happen when Brady leaves Belichick. It's going to put all the spotlight on Belichick to make the right decisions. And Elway didn't have Peyton to carry him and cover up those holes like you mentioned, Chad. It really put the magnification glass on his decision-making. And for a while, considering his ego, considering the way he went with his instinct and the way he ran the team, it didn't work out. He's finally wised up the last couple of years, drafted smart, mostly signed pretty smart players in free agency, at least gave him a good shot. So he's really turned a corner as a GM, and I think that's going to benefit the Broncos going forward.
Black Knight jumps in a $5 donation on Super Chat. Black Knight, you should reach out to us, by the way, milehighhuddle@gmail.com, and give us your personal details so we can send you a little swag as a thank you. You've been a huge supporter of the show. Yeah. We appreciate you. He says, if Isaiah Simmons is there at 15 and a good, talented wide receiver is also there at 15, who do you go with? Also, do we cut DeMarcus Walker in the off?
No.
In the off year? No, on Walker, you 17, 18, 19. So he's going into his contract year. He's going to be on this roster. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the breakout guys in 2020 on the defensive side. But as for his question of Isaiah Simmons versus, let's just say, Jerry Jeudy at pick 15. Zach, I'm taking Isaiah Simmons all day long and moving on to my next task in life.
Yeah, it comes down to the best corner versus the best wide receiver, and I'm going Simmons all day, every day with that pick. It's a very deep wide receiver class, like you mentioned, Chad, so they can get a better guy or a good guy in the second or third round. You're still getting a defensive player that's going to be a cornerstone guy that you desperately need. So if it came down to it, I'm definitely rolling with Simmons as well.
Terry Randall jumps in, $5 donation up in Canada. Again, Broncos country is a state of being. He says, out of the deep freeze. Thanks for keeping me entertained and informed between hockey games. What about one of the middle linebackers from Miami? You talking about the draft? You're talking about the Dolphins. Let me circle back to that one, Terry. I'll come back to that. Let me put a pin in that. Donald has a question. I love you guys. I really do. But is there any way you guys can get Nick on the show? Assume you're talking about Nick Kendall. He's a cool dude. He graded my mock on Twitter, and he's also really smart when it comes to drafting. I learned a lot. You know what, Donald? Ask and you shall receive. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with Nick and Carl to get them set up with how we stream, and so they can start doing at least one of their Building the Broncos podcasts live. So Tuesday nights, I think, is what we've circled. That's a night Zach and I are off. You guys are going to get Nick and Carl doing a live podcast of Building the Broncos. So look forward to that. Not this week. It won't be tomorrow night, but could be as soon as starting as next week. Stu jumps in. $10 donation. Our biggest supporter on Super Chat. Stu, we love you. He says, any chance we make another move down the draft for extra picks like last year? And if so, who? You never say never, Zach, but when you're going into a draft with 12 selections, you begin to get to a point where you can't reasonably project all 12 making your club, right? When you got 12 guys, I mean, you might, on the worst of years, you might have truly 8 to 10 roster spots that are available for competition there to be taken. 12 is pushing it, and you start stacking any more than that. And, it's probably the type of deal where the Broncos, even if they stick with 12 in terms of entering the draft with 12, they don't trade in the first round, they don't trade in the second round. You get to, the dog days of the fifth round. I can see Elway packaging a seventh compensatory, or not compensatory, but a seventh or a sixth round pick moving up. And so it doesn't end up being 12, but I really don't see them trading back in the first round this year unless Elway has served up an offer that he can't refuse, similar to the one Pittsburgh gave him last year.
Yeah, also we have to remember the Broncos are so good at finding undrafted free agents every single year, so they don't even need to have the most draft picks and hoard those draft picks. They'll just find guys that went undrafted, and they'll make the team as every year it happens. But yeah, this is the one year I see the Broncos actually moving up and being aggressive. I think Elway's feeling himself a little more, knowing he has that parachute of Drew Lock, that parachute of having a franchise quarterback, and he'll do whatever it takes if he wants to supplement that guy, whether it's a tackle or a wide receiver.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Aaron says, my panties couldn't be more wadded over the empower statements. I plan on overreacting to this. Hey, dude, listen, far be it from us to tell you, how to live your life. That's not what we're trying to do. I'm just saying that.
What are you going to do?
Dude. It used to, for 2 years, they didn't even have a sponsor. Then it was Sports Authority, filed bankruptcy. Invesco Field lasted for quite a while. I'm just saying, don't get too caught up over it, but to each their own, my brother. I get why that was irritating because, it was eyebrow raising for both of us as well. Let's see here. Robert on YouTube. Should the Broncos go after a stud interior offensive lineman in free agency? The one guy that I don't think is getting talked about enough. I mean, everyone wants to talk about the Washington kid from Iowa. What's his name? I just had the brain fart.
Scherf,
Brandon Scherf. Thank you. But Joe Thuney, the interior player from the New England Patriots, who's also hitting free agency, he's a guy I could see being a home run with Mike Munchak. So, yeah, that's definitely – and that's another need. Going back to the previous question in the stream that we addressed about offseason needs, we talked about corner, we talked about defensive line. Offensive line especially, because you're going to part ways with Ronald Leary unless he's willing to take a massive pay cut. You're parting ways with him. So that opens up right guard. If Connor McGovern was still under contract, you talk to him or you consider moving him back to right guard and you go draft a center or you go with a Patrick Morris or whatever. But I don't think that, you got McGovern's a free agent. So you have to address that. Plus you got to fill the right guard issue. So I think Joe Thuney, he's going to cost some money. And by the way, I don't know if it's Thuney or Tooney. I might be mispronouncing that, but either way, Thuney. He's a guy I really like, Zach.
Even if Leary comes back, which he's not going to, the Broncos still need depth at guard. As we see every single season, they have to splurge at some point and build up the reserves in the cupboard behind the starters that they already have. So I believe it's a priority. I don't believe it's their main priority in free agency or the draft this year, but they have to stock up on a tackle and a guard at the minimum just to give them some insurance in case, the worst strikes next year.
I'm checking something here on Spot Track. I'll circle back to it here.
I'd like to know, the free agent guards, too. That would kind of dictate the answer as well.
Yeah, let me pull it up here. Zach, you grab our next question. I'll pull it up.
All right. We got a super chat here from Josh499. Thank you, Josh. We appreciate you. He wants to know if the Raiders draft Judy or Lamb at 12, we should take another position at 15. If not, we should take Ruggs at 15 so they can't get him at 19. Yeah, I mean, there's always that competitive, chess game between division rivals, but I don't think the Broncos are going to dictate their draft board based on what the Raiders are doing. They haven't really drafted that well, the Raiders, the last couple of years under John Gruden. So the Broncos are going to go in with their draft board. They're going to have their guys that they like. I think they're going to let the board fall to them, Chad.
Yeah, absolutely. John Elway, outside of the Paxton Lynch pick, you could argue Shane Ray, but Shane Ray was a guy that a lot of draftniks had graded as a top 10 caliber edge rusher who got into a little hot water right before the draft, and that caused him to fall. I can understand arguing Shane Ray, but outside of Paxton Lynch in my book, Elway's done a really good job in the first and second round and just staying disciplined and letting the draft come to him for the most part. So I have a hard time seeing him react in that way to anything that a team, whether it's a division rival or not, does before them.
All right, Larry.
Sorry, go ahead. I've got this up when you're ready.
Okay. Larry wants to know if Juwan James is still in a mental fog in the summer. Could we release him? I don't think it's likely. I think they want to see what he can do with one full season in the Broncos system with Mike Munchak. Obviously, the mental limitations there are concerning. That was his reputation in Miami, but the Broncos, I think, are committed to him financially, and obviously they need him to start a right tackle, so he's not going anywhere, Chad.
Yeah, I just did the research on this. I'll pull it back up. The Denver Broncos, it would be painful to part with Juwan James in 2020. Basically, they would have $19 million in dead cap just for 2020.
Yeah.
So he's not going anywhere, guys. Once you get past 2020, you start getting into the team option years, and he would still come with a little bit of dead money, not a little. 2021, $6 million dead. And then 2022, $3 million dead, but still $6 million. You could live with that if he truly does end up. If 2020 ends up being similar to 2019, you can't get him on the field, Zach. Right. You live with the $6 million hit and you take off and go find someone else. But you got to get used to the idea he's going to be here in 2020, regardless of the fog he might be in or not. But I do think there's something to be said about the theory that he's available in the even years and injured in the odd years.
Yeah, it could be. I'm going to 2020. Obviously, we'll have to see if that theory holds, Chad.
All right, let me do a quick share screen, guys. I don't know if you guys how well you can see this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take Zach and our face completely out of this image. This is the top free agents at the interior. Well, it's all of offensive line is what I chose. But you can see here which guys are tackles, guards, centers. Anthony Costanzo is going to be an unrestricted free agent at tackle. He's 32. He's probably not going anywhere. I'd be stunned if the Colts don't find a way to retain him. I'm looking here, Zach. I don't know how well you can read that either, but
I can make it out. Most of it.
Who would be an upgrade?
At guard?
We've talked about, obviously, Scherf, and we've talked about Tooney. I'm looking here at guard,
not a lot.
Nothing's jumping out to me here. Let me keep going. Let's see.
I see Eric Flowers. I want nothing to do with him. Even with the Giants connection with Shermer. Not a lot of great.
Potty.
Yeah, I was looking at that. He's past his prime now, but they're not gonna. I don't think they're not gonna break the bank on a guy. So as a flyer, you could do worse than him. Brandon Scherf's probably the best of the bunch, Chad. But you had Ronald Leary up there as among the best. So that should tell you how picked over the market's going to be.
Quinton Spain is a guy I know Eric Trickle has brought up. Didn't have a great year in 2019 in Buffalo, but you don't know. He's shown some upside in the past, and you don't know if a change of scenery could affect him in a positive way. So, and that's one of the cool things about this is a resource is available to you guys. If you check out spottrack.com, they have a lot of good stuff as it relates salary cap and as it relates free agents. So let's see what else we got here, you guys. We got time for a few more. Let's see. You got Josh. You got jumps back in, $5 donation. Thank you, Xavier. If the 49ers win the Super Bowl, do you think Elway will have some remorse in getting rid of Scangarello? Zach, my answer to that is an emphatic no.
I don't see the connection there, Chad. I don't see why. Because he worked for them last year. That's Kyle Shanahan's operation. If they win the Super Bowl, it's because of Kyle Shanahan's game plan and Kyle Shanahan's coaching, and also Robert Saleh on defense.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is this. They like the upside and his acumen as a developer of quarterbacks and a teacher. and they thought that his rubbing shoulders and being exposed to those philosophies and the X's and O's of Shanahan would be the miracle combination for Rich Scangarello being an OC, but he just coached not to lose, didn't take chances, didn't roll with the punches in terms of making in-game adjustments. And bottom line is Vic Fangio didn't believe that he did the best job to maximize the talent that was on that side of the ball. And I don't think they're going to lose any sleep over that because, Rich Scangarello, again, he did a good job developing Nick Mullins, did a good job helping to ascertain that Jimmy Garoppolo was worthy of giving up that pick to grab him from the Patriots. Outside of that, it's really hard to make any kind of argument in terms of what his impact was on the actual field for the Niners.
If there's any remorse from the Niners winning this game, it's going to be the Broncos not hiring Kyle Shanahan. I like the choice they went with Scanger. I like their thinking. Obviously, I talked it up throughout the offseason this past year, but it didn't work out. I don't think Fangio liked him personally or professionally. It just wasn't a marriage that was well matched for the Broncos.
Jose Moya with a $2 donation.
Thank you, Jose.
Appreciate you, Jose. What is your dream first 2 draft picks this year? Again, for me, I really covet on the defensive side Isaiah Simmons, also Jeffrey Okudah, but I don't really see that being an option. So I'm going to say, well, that's the dream. You're saying what are the dreams? That's the dream for me. Yeah. Now, you wouldn't be able to get them as your first 2 draft picks. In the second round, I may be going for, what's his name, Clyde Hilaire. What's his name? The LSU running back. What's his name? First name. Hold on. LSU back. Tonight my recall with names is killing me. Hold on. Clyde Hilaire. What's his name? Clyde Edwards-Hilaire. Thank you. Thanks, Google. So I wouldn't mind him in the second round. I know that seems a little rich, grabbing a running back that early, knowing what you have in Phillip Lindsay. But you need a 3-down back to complement Lindsay while Lindsay gets up to speed as a receiver to really maximize this Shermer offense. So I don't know. You'll have to circle back on that one as far as you're going round 1 and round 2. But Javon Kinlaw at pick 15 is a more realistic guy that I really covet at 15.
Yeah, I agree with you about the second round pick. In the first round, one offensive player is my dream pick. It would be Ruggs at wide receiver, landing in the Broncos' lap at 15. My, defensive player would be Simmons or Okudah, either or. If the Broncos get any of those 3 guys at 15, they did something really, really well.
Paul jumps back in. We didn't grab this one while I was searching. $20 donation on Super Chat. Paul, man, you are awesome, brother. It's good to have you back in the saddle with us. Which Rich would want Ruggs. Pat would prefer Hamilton-type wide receiver more, in my opinion. Do you agree? I think it's actually the opposite, Paul. I'm not. I think well, I can see what you're saying there, but one of the reasons why Vic Fangio wanted Pat Shurmur was he's just a little bit more aggressive as a play caller as far as vertical. And for vertical, Hamilton's an underneath, get separation with his routes, find the soft spot in the zone. And even though that does favor both offenses from a slot perspective, from a number 2 perspective, you need Ruggs to fit that as opposed to Hamilton. Zach?
I could see the thinking because they signed 2, taller receivers in Cody Latimer, Benny Fowler, 2, you would say possession guys, but they also signed Golden Tate last year in free agency, and he's more of a burner type receiver. So Pat Shurmur, regardless, likes having a lot of wideouts on the field. So with him in tow, wide receiver will be more prioritized this offseason, regardless of who they get or how they get them.
All right, let's grab 2 more here, guys, and then we will get on out for tonight. Let me grab questions here. Here we go. From Jordan. How do you guys see the AFC West shaping up for the next 5 years? Ooh, that's an interesting question, considering the Kansas City Chiefs have now won the AFC West 4 years in a row. Broncos haven't beaten the Chiefs since week 2 of the 2015 season. But the Broncos are a team that are on the rise. They're a team on the come. What's your answer for Jordan?
Well, first of all, I don't see the Raiders being too much of a threat the next couple of years. They're going to be a middling team for as long as John Gruden's, I think, coaching there. 7-9, 8-8 type team, maybe 9-7 one year. I think the Chargers are going into a rebuild, losing Phillip Rivers. They're going to kind of take a few years to get back into contention. If Drew Lock pans out, though, Chad, regardless of Mahomes and the Chiefs and what they're doing this year, if Drew Lock pans out, it's going to be the Broncos versus the Chiefs for the next 5, 7, 10 years, the battle for the AFC West. It's going to be fun to watch, regardless of who wins or what happens.
All right, let me grab one more here. Where'd he go? There it is. Miller707 Champ. consistent member of our community and listener of the show. If we trade down, I'm hoping it's for Trevon Diggs, the Alabama cornerback. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, if you trade down to like the back end of the first round and you could still get Trevon Diggs, or early in the second round, that would be a massive coup. He's one of those guys too that I didn't mention tonight, but he's one of those corners. You know, you get past Okudah, he's one of those corners that you have to consider. Now, there's going to be a lot of analysis on the corner class coming from our draft guys, Eric, Nick, Carl, Lance. But Trevon Diggs is right there with Gladney. He's right there with Christian Fulton as first-round caliber, you know, middle of the first round to the back end of the first round. So if you could get him in a trade down, I think that would be a coup.
I wouldn't mind it, but you have to remember Elway's aversion to Alabama players just in the draft. I don't know what happens or why he does it, but he has some sort of reaction to take an Alabama player. I wouldn't mind it, but I don't think it's likely or realistic to think they're going to trade down this year. If anything, they're going to trade up, but I think ultimately they will stay put. Speaking
of the boys, that was a really good show on was Amazon Prime. I don't know if you guys have checked that out, dude, but that TV show gripped me about like superheroes gone wrong, or, you know, an alternate universe of superheroes being like really terrible celebrities with superpowers. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Huddle Up Podcast live. Kind of a slow day for Broncos news. Not a lot going on. The Senior Bowl kicked off today. Everyone's converging on Mobile, Alabama. So it'll be fun to see what shakes out this week. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get there for the Senior Bowl Mile High Huddle. Neither Zach or myself or anyone from Mile High Huddle. We usually try to get there, at least send one of our guys to the Senior Bowl. This year it wasn't in the cards, but we'll see what happens with the Combine. We got some things in the works, some things cooking that hopefully we'll be able to announce here very soon. If you like what you see here, guys, if you're new to the show, if you're just checking this out on Facebook, if you're just checking this out on YouTube, if you like what you see, share the video. And then don't forget to follow us on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. Simply the best way for you to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the show in real time. And make sure you find my partner on Twitter. I guarantee you will not regret it. Zack Kelberman at Kelberman NFL. Myself at Chad and Jensen. Big thanks to all of our super chat donors tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Our superstars. We love you. And to each one of you who dedicate, you know, give us 49 and 50 minutes of your time on a Monday evening to contribute to this conversation. We love it. It all plays a part, and we enjoy meeting up with you 4 times a week to talk Broncos, talk draft, talk football. It keeps us going.
And I think, Chad, by our next pod, we might have some quarterback coach news. Maybe Shula's going to come through, and the Broncos make that official this week. So hopefully by our next pod, we have more news to share with you guys.
We also have some other more podcast show-oriented news that we are hoping to unveil sometime this week. So stay tuned, guys. We'll be back in the saddle. We're off tomorrow night. We'll be back in the saddle Wednesday, 6 p.m. Mountain, 8 p.m. Eastern. In the meantime, our podcast, if you're listening to this after the fact on the RSS feed on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or iHeart or whatever, you're listening to this on Tuesday, if that's the case. And then Wednesday morning, you'll wake up to a fresh episode of Building the Broncos. And Nick has already sent me the pod, and it looks like it's going to be a juicy one. So look forward to that. And then again, Zach and I will be back Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Mountain, 8 p.m. Eastern. Until then, for Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. Thanks again to everybody.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.